Okay, on to our third and final section of the quiz. Here, we're going to take all the elements that's given to us, and we're going to form a complete sentence. And well, it already tells us in the instructions that we're using the present subjunctive, but we're going to talk about why we're using the present subjunctive. Get more out of this than just a simple, just conjugate it. Let's figure out why. But this definitely would take a lot of thought on your own. So I'm going to try to walk you through it. But I might be a little bit slow to you because I'm trying to get you to kind of do the thinking before I say it. So here we go. And the first one, or let's look at the example for a second, actually. We got nosotros with querer, que, and venir. We know it's going to be the usted form, a la fiesta. So we're not changing too many elements of this. We're just going to make sure we form querer in the nosotros form. But we know we want to start off our sentence with something in the indicative. The indicative tells us whether or not we have a subjunctive trigger or not. So we need, we'll conjugate queremos, that's a verb of influence. There's a subjunctive trigger. As long as we have a new subject, which we do, it's usted in the subordinate clause. So we end up with queremos que venga a la fiesta. Again, look at what we've changed here. Well, we got rid of nosotros because it's unnecessary since we have the conjugation queremos. It's already implied that's nosotros because of the ending. Que venga a la fiesta. Now, you might put que usted venga a la fiesta, and that would also be good. All right, let's move on. So, yo with pedirles que ustedes darme otra oportunidad. So, we know with this one, we could probably leave off the yo, but I will just include it for now. Yo. And then we've got pedirles. We know we have to conjugate pedir, and this is going to be indicative right now because this is a verb of influence, or we're going to figure out whether it's a verb of influence, but whatever it is, we can't just start off with subjunctive. We need to have something to tell us to use a subjunctive. So this will be in the indicative, pido. Now this is pedirles. So we're talking to these, to ustedes. We're asking them to do something. And so we have les, the indirect object pronoun. We know if we have an indirect object pronoun, it has to go before the conjugated verb. So yo les pido. This is really, really common with these verbs of influence. Yo les pido que, and then ustedes could be optional. I'd recommend using it here since it's a little bit vague without that subject. And then we're going to have to conjugate our verb according to ustedes, but also knowing that we've got a verb of influence in the yo form. If the subordinate clause is in the ustedes form, so verb of influence, change in subject, we will use then. Then is your conjugation of that. Now it was giving me another chance, another opportunity. May. Where is that may going to have to go? Now that's going to go before the conjugated verb. If you were thinking it should be attached to it, that's only for commands. We attach object pronouns to commands, not to conjugations. You can also attach it to other parts, other forms. You can attach them to infinitives and present participles, but we're not doing that right now. So then you could have attached may to then if it were used as a command, but that's not what we're doing. We're not using a command. We're using subjunctive conjugations. So yo les pido que ustedes me den, and then just finish with the otra oportunidad. And we're done. All right, moving on. Second one. Mis primos sugerirme que yo decir la verdad. We're going to change a couple things. Let's start off with mis primos. We're not changing that, but that's our subject. And they're going to suggest to me, sugerirme. So they're suggesting. Now we're going to conjugate sugerir in the indicative because, again, we are going to have a verb of influence. That part will be in the indicative. And we will conjugate. That is actually sugerir is a stem changing verb. So sugieren, because we have mis primos is third person plural, sugieren. And they're suggesting it to me. So let's put the me before the conjugation. Me sugieren que yo diga la verdad. Now I went ahead and just go ahead and conjugated it for you, but I think we're starting to catch on, right? We get the verb of influence. is in the ellos form, mis primos, and we have a change in subject. So we have to conjugate this here in the subjunctive. Present subjunctive, diga. Okay, moving on. Clara desear que haber más fiestas su casa. Okay. Now, this one was with Clara. Well, if desear is our verb, was conjugated according to Clara, you should realize that should be desea. Okay. And now, what is haber? Do you remember we talked about this a lot in the last few classes? Haber is the infinitive form of a weird conjugation. It's from, this is not the answer, but this is what it's from. This I comes from the verb haber. It's the infinitive is of I is haber, even though I is not actually in our verb chart. It's a weird one. But anyways, what she's saying, she wishes, that there were more parties, that there are more parties at her house. Now, but she wishes that there are, or that there were, really that there are. So she wishes that there are, she is wishing, that's a verb of influence or a verb of desire, a verb of influence, will, influence, desire, whatever you want to, however you want to word it, a word, verb of want, volition, but we've got that. We've got to change the subject because there are more parties. There are. That's not Clara. That's not who's doing that. So it's definitely a different subject. So what is we're only worried about this, the equivalent of I in the subjunctive. We're not worrying about the yo form, the to form right now, but what's the equivalent here of I? It's actually pretty simple. It's just add the A to it. Haya más fiestas. And then probably we'd have to add the N here, en su casa, at her house, en su casa. Going to say more parties her house. So, Clara desea que haya más fiestas en su casa. Ustedes is our subject here. And they are advising us. So you guys are advising us. So let's conjugate the verb, aconsejan. That's going to be the infinitive or the indicative because we have we have to have a trigger in the indicative first to tell us to use the subjunctive. So, and they're going to advise it to us. Indirect object pronoun goes before the conjugation. Ustedes nos aconsejan que nosotros. Now we've got leer with nosotros form. Follow the rules. We're going to use the subjunctive because we have a verb of influence. With it, we had ustedes as the subject here, nosotros is the subject here. So verb of influence with a change in subject. So leo is the yo form. Drop the yo. Add amos because it's an er verb. Que nosotros leamos ese libro. Okay. Next up, cinco. So you begging someone, lay, we got the lay there, your neighbor. So that's who you'll be begging for them to start to clean their yard, or it can also be garden or yard. So I'm gonna go with probably yard. So you are gonna beg, and you're begging to this person. So I've been conjugating for you to start off, but this time I'm going to go ahead and just put our indirect object pronoun in there. It's going to be important for you to kind of get used to this pattern. Whenever you have these verbs, with aconsejar, sugerir, pedir, rogar, insistir, a lot of these times you have indirect object pronouns. Decir, a lot of indirect object pronouns to go with them. So it's kind of good to get used to forming them together, not just think let's conjugate it and then put the object pronoun in there because your order is going to get screwed up. So I'm going to go ahead and put lay here first because we're talking to or begging your neighbor. Or tú digo le ruegas, missed a letter there, ruegas a tu vecino. Now this a tu vecino is just clarifying whom we are begging because we have the lay in there. The a tu vecino is not required, but again, we want to be specific. Clarify a tu vecino. Okay. Con bien. Now this is, we've got that verb of influence. Tu is the subject. Now, tu vecino is the subject here of the second clause, of the subordinate clause, which, yeah, it says tu in there, but it means your neighbor. It's not you. It's a different word here. So this is third person singular. We've got the second person singular here. We definitely have a change in subject. Verb of influence, change in subject. So we're going to use the subjunctive. And this should be, it's comenzar, Z-A-R. So be careful on that one. So you know when we conjugate it, comience. And the form, whenever you have comenzar, to, you're starting to do something, it does have an a there. That preposition a goes before your infinitive next, which limpiar will be the infinitive form. And then we'll just add that su jardín. And there we go. And last one. Mis amigos y yo. So we've got, this is mis amigos y yo. Anything in y yo is essentially just saying nosotros, my friends, and I. That's just like saying we. And in español, mis amigos y yo es como decir nosotros. Insistimos, IR verbs. So remember, IR verbs in the present tense are a little bit different. Insistimos en, and that N is always attached to that insistir. You're going to have that, then we might say this, my friends and I insist that you sit down to eat with us. So we insist that you eat with us. You see how the N is in there though? It doesn't, you might say this, let's see how it sounds. My friends and I insist on you sitting with us, sitting to eat with us. I guess that sounds okay too, but in Spanish that N is going to be, you're going to need it in there with this conjugation. So it's just real common practice to is that insistir en, have the N with it. There are a lot of verbs we'll learn along the way that have prepositions attached to it. Just kind of like we did with comenzar plus a. We're actually going to do that here in a second too. We're going to add another preposition, it looks like. So you really got to pay attention to those little details that go along with a lot of our verbs as you learn them. All right, mis amigos y yo insistimos en que usted. And now we've got sentarse, so it's a reflexive verb. So let's put our reflexive object pronoun. And we've got insisting. We are insisting. You are sitting. So verb of influence, change in subject. So let's conjugate this. And this is a stem changing verb. And we are in the boot, so we will stem change here. And se siente a comer con nosotros. All right, so there it is. I'm gonna go ahead and submit. Let's see how we did. Hopefully I got them all right, unless I made some little silly mistake, but I doubt it. All right, looks good. All right, if you have any questions, please reach out. Adios.